Good evening, everyone. My name is Lucas Isakowitz. I'm so excited to be emceeing this event. I've been running around Climate Week for the past 2 days and meeting with a bunch of different people. I don't care about any of that. I'm so excited for this. This is amazing. It's really a pleasure to be here with you all. We've got a great program. We're going to hear about Cambium, the remarkable work they do to transform the sustainable wood industry. We're going to hear about some of the work of the Honnold Foundation and their efforts to bring solar energy to communities around the world. And I'm going to tee up the conversation that Ben Christensen, the founder of Cambium, and Alex Honnold are going to have here. But before I do that, I want to admit something that might be a little strange to say out loud, but when I go climbing, sometimes I get very, very scared. Like my hands start sweating and I wish I wasn't on the side of a mountain. And when that happens to me, I think about two people. I think about my mom and I think about Alex Honnold. And you know, my mom, she makes me feel held. I love her. Alex, I don't know Alex personally at all. I'm excited to meet him. But anyone who watches Free Solo leaves inspired by what humans can really do, what we can achieve in hard moments. And in some sense, that's what we're going to talk about tonight, how to get through difficult situations. So as we all know, policies are shifting, the funding is scarce, commitments are being tested, and the question that we're all asking ourselves in the climate space is, how do we keep going? And so the two speakers, Ben and Alex, know a lot about this. Ben Christensen, who's a dear friend of mine, he's run multiple 100-mile races, including 150 miles in the Sahara Desert and 130 miles across the Denali Wilderness this summer. And while running these races, somehow Ben has also co-founded an incredible company with Marissa and Theo. You'll hear from Theo as well. They've managed to build this incredible climate tech company that employs 50 people, that works across every major city across the country, has raised tens of millions of dollars, and is really revolutionizing the way that the circular wood supply chain works. They've won awards, Time, Forbes, 30 Under 30, etc. He's just an incredible person. He's a dear friend of mine. It's going to bring a lot of context. Alex Honnold, you all probably already know, but he's one of the most recognized climbers of this generation. He free soloed El Cap, 3,000 feet of granite with nothing holding him on the wall but his two hands. He won an Oscar. Well, he didn't win an Oscar. The documentary that he's featured in won an Oscar. And he's also founded this incredible foundation that brings clean energy to communities that need it most. And before I hand it to some of the main programming here, I want to tell another quick story that I think is going to help frame this conversation and the incredible speakers that we have tonight. 6 months ago, I was living with Ben Christensen and Theo Hooker, the two co-founders of Cambium, in Washington, D.C. We're going to hear about their incredible wood company very soon. They want me to say that. And Ben and Theo were running really, really fast. They were raising money, getting contracts with cities to escalate this really important work. And at the time, I was working as a diplomat for USAID. With climate projects around the world. And it felt like all of us collectively as a climate movement were charging uphill together. And then pretty suddenly the ground gave way. The change in administration, the Trump administration brought deep cuts to USAID. Programs that we had spent years building were dismantled, and my colleagues across the world lost their footing. I lost my job, so did a lot of people, but really made us kind of unsure of the next step. And in this moment, watching Ben and Theo continue forward, finding a way to navigate this new environment, to continue funding sustainable projects in this new environment was really inspiring. And you're going to get to know a little bit more about them tonight and the work that they do. But the one thing that I want to say about the two of them is that what makes them special is the generosity of their energy. They're always willing to share what they've got. And during this difficult period, when things were hard, they gave me patience and grit. Patience to know that it will pass, and grit to keep showing up and keep doing the work, even when it's hard. And I think this is what really matters tonight, because we're all facing a wall. The policies are shifting, funding is scarce, commitments are tested, and the question is, how do you hold on when the easy thing is to let go? And I'm really excited about this conversation to come. I think it's going to be inspiring and insightful. Before we get to hear from Ben and Alex, we're going to hear a little bit about the Honnold Foundation, about Cara Solar and Cambium, to ground us in the real work that's happening right now. And so before I hand it to them, I think we have a quick video to tee up. I think we're having an audio issue here.
The worst effects of climate change are felt by the least privileged people on Earth. For most of the developed world, we'll adapt as we go, but it's really in the developing world that people are going to be the most personally affected by a changing climate. And that's, that's the same sort of issues of unfairness that helped me start the foundation, 10 years ago. We're supporting community organizations around the world, and we're trusting our partners to do what's best for their community in a way that's good for the environment. At a fundamental level, I come from a worldview of sort of abundance. I think that there's more than enough for everybody to go around. It's more about equitably distributing what we have. If you're trying to protect the environment, it starts by helping make sure that people have everything that they need.
So to hear a little bit more about the work of the Honnold Foundation, I'm going to call on two folks, Emily Teitsworth and Oliver Utney. Emily is the executive director of the Honnold Foundation. She has over 2 decades of experience. You can come on stage. And we can give him a round of applause as well. Thank you. Emily is the executive director of the Honnold Foundation. She has over 2 decades of experience growing and evolving organizations in the nonprofit and philanthropic space. She's worked in Central America, Sub-Saharan Africa, South Asia, and the United States with a strong focus on environmental justice and public health. She also has writing that's been featured widely in a number of publications, including Stanford Social Innovation. Emily's joined by Oliver, who's the founder of Cara Solar, an Ecuadorian nonprofit that builds solar-powered river transport for indigenous communities. He's also the founder and chair of Motores Amazonas, a manufacturing company that builds boats for rugged Amazonian conditions. And so we're going to hear a little bit from the two of them right now.
Thank you. Thank you all so much for being here tonight. My name is Emily Teitsworth. I'm the executive director of the Honnold Foundation, and you'll hear from our founder here in a few minutes. But to kind of ground us before we get into that conversation, I wanted to talk a little bit about our work and our approach and have an opportunity to talk with Oliver about the work that they're doing to build a solar river in the Ecuadorian Amazon. So Honnold Foundation is a seed funder focused on community climate and energy solutions in marginalized and frontline communities around the world. We really believe about putting resources, power, and access into the hands of the communities that are on the front lines of climate change, focusing specifically on solar energy. We've seen through a network of 100 projects around the world, benefiting over 300,000 people, that solar power truly builds social power. And when you invest in communities and take risks and innovate and try new things alongside communities, the impact on both climate and economic development is incredible. So I'm really excited to be here with Oliver, talk a little bit about their work. Cara Solar is a longtime grantee partner of the Honnold Foundation, and they are working in Ecuadorian Amazon communities to build a solar river and a network of solar-powered boats. So thank you, Oliver, for being here.
Thank you.
Awesome. So to start, can you tell us just a little bit about Cara Solar and what the solar boat network is doing in terms of community development and conservation in the Amazon?
Yes. First of all, just thank you for having us here. I'm really honored to be in front of you all and to be representing an amazing team of over 30 mostly indigenous people in Ecuador who are day in and day out doing amazing work. And Cara Solar or Cara Solar, both work. Cara is a Achuar indigenous word that means a vision of the future. And in 2016, we built the first solar-powered boat in the Amazon. And we have been improving ever since then. We built 13 now across Ecuador, Peru, Brazil, Suriname, and the Solomon Islands. And we believe that road building in the Amazon is a threat that is addressable, and that there's an interconnected, navigable network of rivers that have been ancestral highways and can continue to be, and that the technology exists, and that the world would benefit from electrifying transportation in the Amazon.
So a few years into your journey with Cara Solar, you developed Motores Amazonas, or Amazonian Motors. I'd love to hear a little bit more about how that grew out of Cara Solar and what the solar river boat concept means.
Cool. So I think the first big learning for us when we started building solar-powered boats was that it doesn't matter how good of a design or how beautiful of a boat you build, if you don't have local people who know how to take it apart and rebuild it, it's not going to last and it's not going to have a real impact. And so our work pretty quickly became about training, about training indigenous technical teams. And that's what we really excelled at. And I think in a way we've kind of reached the limits of what we can do with the equipment that's currently on the market. And we realized that most motors and batteries that are on the market, like most technology that's being built today, is not made for backcountry conditions. It's not made for places where if something breaks down and you're days and days from the nearest city, you can take out your tools and fix it. And most technology is very deliberately made that way. And that doesn't work in the Amazon. The Amazon is a unique geography that requires technology that's really robust, really simple, and repairable. And so we spun off a company from the foundation with help from all of our supporters. And we've started manufacturing a very simple long tail electric motor and a very simple battery. That's a 5 kilowatt battery. Each battery takes you about 30 kilometers, and you can stack them up and use 4 or 5 to get to where you need to go. And what we're focused on doing now is building out a network of recharge stations. We're working with the largest province in Ecuador, which is led by a pretty visionary young governor who's committed to reversing the trend of where regional governments across the Amazon, really from Bolsonaro's Brazil to Maduro's Venezuela, they all converge on this agreement that roads make sense. And he's kind of stood up and said, actually, let's question this, and declared that he's not going to build any more roads in his territory or in his province, and that he's going to support us in building out this network of recharge stations. And so we're raising $10 million, and we're going to build 100 recharge stations, which is enough recharge capacity for 1,000 boats. And that $10 million will result in yearly savings of $2.5 million, which will stay in the pockets of indigenous people and have all kinds of really positive follow-on effects, for not having to cut down trees or poach animals in order to pay for gasoline. They also have power for local clean economies and local production, local health, communication, education. So we feel like we really know what the infrastructure of the future of the Amazon looks like. And we're building it. It's called the Solar Rivers. And it's starting on the Pastaza River Basin of Ecuador. And then we're going to replicate it across Colombia and Peru and Brazil and Bolivia.
I think you're touching on two really important things. One of the things that I've learned from Oliver and Carsolar is that avoiding future road building is essential to stopping extractive activity like logging and mining. And so in addition to building this sort of economic development system and transportation hubs, it really is a critical piece of protecting this very biodiverse land and water. And so I think that's a really, really key piece to highlight. And the other thing is you're talking about scaling up and growing. And I think this highlights like what I love about our partnership is you can talk a little bit about this if you'd like, but I'd love to hear like what it means to you to have access to philanthropic capital and how you use sort of philanthropy and grants and other forms of investment when you're thinking about scaling and growing the work that you're doing.
Right, for sure. Yeah, I mean, we know that it makes sense to build recharge stations and use electric transportation in these really isolated parts of the Amazon. But even though you invest $10 million and you save 2.5 annually, you still need the $10 million. And indigenous people in the Amazon don't have that. And so we need other actors to step in. And I think, long term, I think there's a really viable case. And I think we're building it. The local governments who right now spend over half of their budgets building roads, they can very reasonably pay for these networks of recharge stations. And I think they will in the long term, but we have to prove it. And we have to bring in other kinds of capital first, show that it's viable, and make it work. And local people also spend over half of their income on gasoline. And so, yeah, all the economics line up really well, except for the fact that we need the first world to step up and pay for it to get it started.
Yeah. So the Honnold Foundation worked with Carsolar for I think 4 years now. And we work with a network of over 100 amazing organizations like Carsolar around the world, specifically based in marginalized communities, primarily in the US and Latin America. And we work with a network of corporate, individual, and foundation funders to resource this work alongside our founder Alex's annual contributions. So I would really encourage everyone to learn more about Carsolar and to join us in resourcing work that truly is changing lives and protecting the planet. Thank you all so much.
Thank you so much, Emily and Oliver. Next up, I'm going to introduce Theo Hooker onto the stage. Hey, Theo, come on up here. He's a dear friend of mine, and also he's a co-founder and chief commercial officer of Cambium, which builds modern supply chains for sustainable traceable materials in the built environment. After college, Theo traveled around the world as a Thomas J. Watson Fellow exploring sustainable food systems. His experiences have shaped his approach to building businesses that are good for people and planet. Throughout building Cambium, he's worn many hats. He's also, like Ben, an ultra runner. He's ran 150 miles in Sahara, 135 miles in Denali. So he's an incredible human. Excited to hear from Theo.
Thank you, Lucas. Welcome. Thanks all for being here. Before I jump into a little bit of context about Cambium, I want to make sure that we're all here. If you're like me, you've been running around New York City, maybe on a city bike, maybe on the metro. There's so many reasons to be distracted, to be pulled away tonight. So I invite you all to take 3 breaths. Sit a little taller in your chair. Feel your body connect to your seat. Feel your feet grounded on the floor. Breathe in. Pay attention to how the breath feels entering your body. Breathe out. Feel your shoulders relax a little bit. One more time. Breathe in. Breathe out. Thank you. And welcome again. We're really excited to have you here. So I'm Theo. I'm one of the co-founders at Cambium, as you've heard. And Cambium started with one question. How do we do things differently and better for the planet? Ben and I grew up together in Albuquerque, and whether it was spending 24 days on the Appalachian Trail as 17-year-olds, running 6 marathons in 6 days in the Sahara, or our latest 130-mile run in Denali, we've always asked the question, what if it was different? What if the stories that we're taught and told aren't true? What if there is a different, better way of doing things? As Lucas mentioned, at Cambium, we build supply chains for salvaged material, whether that's disaster relief hurricane material or wildfire mitigation clearings or anything in between. We work to make it as easy as possible to connect the source of the material to the processors, to the end consumers, connecting a traceable, transparent supply chain for people on the planet, and connecting the consumers of materials that we use every day to the people and planet impacts of those choices. And that brings us here tonight for this conversation. To fight climate change, we cannot accept the status quo. We must be bold enough to ask the question, what would this look like if it was different? And then we must be brave and courageous enough to breathe that into reality. And arguably, there's no one who has done a better job of challenging what humans believe to be possible than our guest tonight. So, thank you all again for coming. Welcome, and we're really excited to have you.
Thank you, Theo. Okay, so with that, I'd really love to invite Ben and Alex to come out on the stage for a great conversation. Thank you so much.
Hello. Hey, all. Hey, yeah, great to see you. Thanks for being here. We're so excited. Thank you for a wonderful intro. Can we just get a quick round of applause for everybody introducing there? And thank you all for doing one. So a little run of show here. Alex and I are going to talk for a little bit. We're going to have Q&A at the end. So make sure you're tracking questions. We're going to try to keep this pretty conversational, both between us and then with all of you. So be ready with questions. We're super excited to have the conversation here. Alex, we're here. We're in New York. We're at Climate Week. We're in the city, obviously a little different than your normal haunts. What's it been like? Like, how's Climate Week been? What's your take on the last few days?
No, Fun Week is busy. Though actually today I came here straight from the climbing gym and e-biked the whole way, and honestly it feels like our mountain climbing. It's pretty intense. Like totally on for the whole ride and going hard at the gym. It's like a normal day, except more exciting and more stimulating.
And you're saying you had a pretty good sesh, like feeling
Yeah,
good?
yeah, epic sesh there. I'm still glowing. Yeah, you just never know. I squeezed in some climbing in between Climate Week events, and you just never know which sessions are going to be great, and you got to celebrate the ones that go well. So fun.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like it's one of those things where it's always tricky to squeeze in the workout, and you definitely are glowing, Alex. So it's looking good. Awesome. So we are obviously here to think about resilience, to think about how we as individuals, how we as a movement are able to deal and go through some difficult stuff. And so want to start getting into that. Obviously, you spent a ton of time going through some challenging pieces. And for us as a movement right now in the climate space, obviously the context, the backdrop of this is a difficult moment. And so curious, for your take generally, like what's your take on this moment right now for the climate movement in this sort of hard spot?
I mean, I'm certainly no expert on any of this. Yeah, I mean, it seems hard, but things. I mean, work that's worth doing is worth doing, whether it's hard or not. So you just keep doing, the work that matters. I think. I mean, it's funny not to keep bringing it back to my gym session, but I am really quite pleased. But the thing about it is that consistency matters. It's like you just keep showing up and doing the thing, and sometimes it goes well, sometimes it doesn't go well, but the effort matters, the consistency matters, and you're bound to have some wins every once in a while if you keep showing up and grinding. And so I feel like that's actually surprisingly applicable right now in the current climate, the climate around climate, basically the current political climate. Sort of like all you can really do is keep showing up and trying your hardest and doing the thing, and you're bound to get some wins eventually. Maybe not immediately though.
Take some time. I mean,
Yeah.
we were just talking about backstage about sort of the classic sales presentation, right? Which is go grind, go do it. You're going to get immediate results. And what are you always saying to the sales folks?
Well, yeah, we were joking because I occasionally speak for sales conferences and things like that, where it's like supposed to be a motivational speaker. And I'm like, well, if you try your hardest for 30 years, you're bound to do okay every once in a while. It's sort of like, well, it doesn't really help you for Q1 or even Q2 really. But if you practice, because I've been climbing, I just turned 40, which is crazy, but I've been climbing basically 5 days a week since I was 10. And so 30 years of consistent effort at something, trying my absolute hardest all the time, consistently pushing myself, trying to do new things. You're like, well, you're bound to do something that you're proud of every once in a while if you tried that hard for that long. But sadly, for sales meetings, I don't know if they care about that. Yeah. They're like, but what about Q3? You're like, no, you still got to keep grinding. Like,
And then Q4 happens.
yeah. But maybe by Q5, if you go really hard for a whole year, you're bound to get okay. But yeah, eventually you'll get some results, hopefully.
All right, I'm curious, when you think, obviously, you love climbing, if I'm allowed to guess.
Yeah, for sure.
That, okay.
Yeah. I love climbing.
Obviously, my experience, at least with running, is I love running, but there's some days that I'm not excited to run. What's your take? How do you approach that? Do you find that you always love it? How do you approach it when you're not feeling as in the zone? What's your take on consistency through that?
Yeah, I mean, I think climbing is maybe more fun than running. So I think it is maybe a little bit easier to agree to disagree. I mean, especially ultra running and like deep into the paint. I mean, running long distances is very hard. I haven't run that far, but I've run far enough to know that it's really hard. And no, I think climbing is maybe inherently more fun. But that said, I mean, there's still days that are challenging. But you still have to show up. I think is it Kareem Abdul-Jabbar? I think there's the famous basketball player has a quote that part of being a professional means doing the thing you love even on the days you don't love it.
Yeah.
And I think about that all the time with training sessions when I'm just sucking in my garage. You're kind of like, part of being a professional rock climber, like the gift of being able to do this for a living is that some days when you're sucking and it hurts and it's hard, you just do it anyway because you just have to put in the hours. But at least I do, because I'm not like naturally talented enough to just do it at a high level unless I try really hard.
And really consistently.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I certainly have some friends who off the couch are just really, really strong. You're kind of like, man, I wish I was like that, but sadly, I'm not. So, you just take what you can get. Just keep trying your best.
No, I feel that all the time. I constantly feel like an inadequate runner who's, if I
So sure, run a really long ways.
It's just really slow though. You know, it's a long way.
But man, it's so painful. Huh?
It is. There's highs as well. I mean, I can't imagine climbing. I have a horrible fear of heights. I just get crippling vertigo. So, you know.
You just need to keep trying.
All right, we can skip.
We're all
past
moving on. Yeah.
Don't want to that. I'm curious, you know, thinking about, again, when you are in a difficult moment, whether that's, you know, in a climb, but also in life, right? Like you've got your 2 kids, you know, I can't imagine that's always easy. When you're in a difficult moment, what do you say to yourself? What's sort of the self-talk? What do you try to say to yourself when you're in a really tricky moment with that?
Well, it depends. I mean, if you mean like an acutely tricky moment, like you're free soloing a big wall and you're something like, oh, I broke a hold, or you know, the weather's coming in or whatever, I think that kind of self-talk is a little bit different than you know, when you're having a terrible gym session and your baby started crying over the monitor and you're like, oh man, she woke up halfway through the nap. Oh my God. That happened a couple days ago, sir. You know, and you're just kind of like that kind of self-talk. I think the latter with, you know, when you're just sucking and then your baby's crying and whatever, that kind of self-talk is more about just showing up and, you know, being compassionate to yourself or whatever, being like, you know what, not every day has to be your day, but at least you're trying, and that's pretty good. But the acute kind of self-talk where you're in the midst of an actual crisis, like something has happened or you're in a seriously dangerous situation rock climbing, that I think is a little bit more nuanced, where it just kind of depends what the situation calls for. I mean, sometimes the best thing is to retreat, you know, so you don't want to sort of talk yourself up. But sometimes you do need to just push through fear or overcome or whatever. So I think that calls for a slightly finer evaluation, you know, like really deciding what the circumstance calls for and then trying to do the right thing.
What's your take? I mean, this has got to be different, obviously, depending on the circumstance when you're in that acute space. You know, something Theo and I talk about all the time when going these really long distances. You're inevitably going to be feeling really, really bad. You're going to have a moment where you feel awful and you're about to quit. And we always say, like, don't quit when you're in the emotional swing of it, right? Like, don't pull out, don't bail. Like, how do you think about taking a knee, slowing down? And obviously, there's probably some moments for you in particular, like, we can always sit down. You can't do that. How do you think about taking a knee?
Actually, you can do that more than you might expect climbing. Because that's the thing with climbing, even a big sheer rock face like El Capitan or something that looks totally smooth. I mean, there are ledges all over. There are little things like this chair that you could pause on for periods of time. So, I mean, you can actually stop and take breathers and chill. And, you know, I mean, not during the actual hardest sections, but every couple 100 feet or so, you could stop. And so, yeah, every once in a while you do, you know, do some self-care. You stop, you eat, you drink, you pee, you like take care of yourself, and you know, you tighten and loosen your shoes and just kind of generally pace yourself. Yeah, I mean, it just depends what's
happening.
Yeah.
Well, I would love to see some resting on this is our wood, so it's red oak trees. So we can put it to the test. It hasn't been tested for climbers. Curious, you know, when you think about preparation and sort of preparing for those types of moments, you know, something I always think about a lot when ultra running is you want to do the work of, again, engaging with those worst sections visually in yourself beforehand. How do you think that applies in like life or in work? You know, what are the sort of dots that we can take from the climate movement and really being prepared before the hard moments? Like, I think we know there's a lot more hard moments coming for us as a movement right now. What do we need to be thinking about and visualizing, and how does that sort of apply?
Well, it's interesting actually, because I think so in free soloing, like climbing, you know, big walls without a rope, visualization plays a huge role in that, you know, because you can't necessarily practice it ahead of time. You really have to visualize every component, you know, imagine everything that could potentially go wrong, and just think it all through ahead of time so that you're not surprised when you're actually doing the climb. But I think that level of preparation and that level of visualization is maybe not necessary for climate work or climate advocacy or like any of this type of work, because the thing is, the consequences aren't death if you fail. I mean, you know, the reality of climate change is that it's a long, slow process. And I think you're probably better off doing something immediately and even getting it wrong and then trying something else and you know, basically iterating, you know, like trying, failing, moving forward. I think, you know, there are situations where you can fail, and in those situations you shouldn't be afraid to fail. And so I think it's important to differentiate the times where you absolutely cannot get something wrong, whereas versus the times where you can get it wrong. So like you should just try quickly and try some things. And so I think with a lot of climate change solutions, you're kind of better off trying and acting rather than being paralyzed by indecision or fear. You know,
Yeah, I mean, I completely agree with that. I mean, I think one of the big things that we have to continue with in terms of building momentum, creating that sort of connected and, real communal work that is really advancing us forward is staying really, really tied into, again, that focus and not being afraid to fail, right? I think that's something that is really easy in a moment when there's negative context around, people are pushing back in lots of different ways. It's easy to be like, oh, the pressure is on, the scrutiny is there in a much bigger way, and like to depressurize that. Makes some sense.
yeah, and actually, I mean, so taking this a step slightly sideways, I mean, when we're talking about fear around climate and things like that, and talking about taking risks and all those kinds of things, I mean, I think it's important to remember that anybody in this room is not really facing the worst risks of climate change. Like, we're fine. Like, it's so cold in here. I mean, speaking of, like, this is incredibly well climate controlled. Like, we're lit after dark. I mean, there's several billion people on Earth who are going to face the worst effects of climate change and basically run the biggest risks. And they've also done the least to contribute to the causes of climate change. And so I think it's important when we think about taking risks and acting on climate to remember that the people who are most impacted by it have, I mean, sure, they're running actual physical risks to their lives. It's like drought, flood, like hardship, dislocating, moving around. It's like I mean, I don't know the statistics, but like hundreds of millions of people on Earth for sure are facing actual real physical risk from climate change. And so it's one thing to be like, oh, I'm afraid that the world is changing, but you're kind of like, realistically, we're in AC, like we're doing fine. I mean, it's like, oh, there's a little bit of wildfire smoke on the East Coast in the summer, and it's a bummer. And there are a lot of aspects of life that are definitely worse around climate change, but we're not facing real physical risk from that. And so I think it's important to remember that.
Yeah, I mean, it's obviously,
And I think it's important for us to take commensurate risks in a way. It's like,
yeah,
we're in a position where we can afford to try things and fail because, like our lives aren't on the line if we do. It's like, so we should push a little harder and try a little harder because we're in the position that we can do that.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we are in a position where we get to choose, right? We are going to be able to adapt to this in a really different way. And climate change obviously is really inequitable. Those impacts aren't shared. When you think about responsibility, right? Like I would guess most people in this room feel responsibility there. I love the push of, hey, you should be really going in sort of the boldest and fullest way. How do you scale that? How do you think about getting other people to take that responsibility? Especially, we're at Climate Week, but what about the other people who aren't in this room? How do you think about that?
I don't know. I mean, I think, each individual kind of finds their own way. I mean, I started a foundation, which, I put my name on, which is like kind of weird, kind of douchey, but I was like, well, but if it allows me to raise more money and allows me to give more money and grants to projects that matter, then you're kind of like, that's great. It's worth it. And so, I mean, I think every individual finds their own path in this. Like, you engage with others, you build community, you build coalitions, like however, you engage in advocacy, you just start a foundation, you give philanthropically, or you devote your work, I mean, depending on what your particular skills are and what you're able to do. I mean, everybody has something else to, like, their own unique thing to contribute. But, I think you got to find your path.
Yeah. When you think about that, when you think about young folks in this audience, folks who are on maybe the early steps of that journey, what do you have to get right in the finding of the path? Like, what's the mindset? What's the approach to sort of getting into that in the right way?
I think I was at an event last night where a woman who was speaking was giving a little Venn diagram of, what are you uniquely good at? What can you contribute? And then a third thing.
Yeah.
What's that?
Yeah.
Climate man. I have them.
Yeah. Nice. What was the third thing? Anyway, doesn't matter. Yeah. What do you love doing? It's funny because I heard what are you good at and what do you love doing is basically one thing. So I was like, rock climbing. And every issue was speaking. So, but I heard this, like, what are you good at? What do you love doing? And what can you sort of uniquely contribute? And like, in what way? And I was kind of like, I hear that and I'm sort of like, I love rock climbing and I've started a foundation basically to leverage the whatever I've achieved through climbing, at least I can sort of push into something positive. So it's like, realistically, rock climbing is never going to make that much money. Like, I'm not going to be able to contribute that much philanthropically myself because climbing, I lived in a car for 12 years. It's like, climbing's just climbing's not professional baseball, but it's way more fun though. And so, I don't know. I mean, I think everybody has to think for themselves, their little Venn diagrams, like, what are they good at? What do they love to do? And how can they give back by doing that?
Yeah. I'd love that. I mean, I think one of the biggest...
I mean, it seems like you probably also kind of nailed that, where it's like you're doing something you love to do that's also useful, and you're like, oh, that's perfect. I mean, I think that's what I assume that's what most people can kind of aspire to, is lining up their work with something they're passionate about that's also good for the planet.
Yeah, I mean, I feel like I work like an hour a week. Don't tell our investors in the audience here. It's how it feels. Put in a lot of hours, but that is the amount of tasks that I'm not excited about doing because it feels so aligned, and you just get to do it, and you just do it over and over and over.
No, I mean, climbing is exactly the same way, where it's like, if I didn't love climbing the way I do, I mean, it would be kind of a grind. You're like, it's physically very challenging. It's kind of painful. You're out in, extreme conditions all the time doing all this stuff. But if you love doing it, you're just like, what a joy. I get to do this all the time. It's so fun.
So what's next? Like, how does this evolve for you when you think about, again, scaling that responsibility with HF? What are you thinking about, growing into? What's the 5-year, 10-year? What's the bigger next vision?
Well, I think, I don't know. I mean, I'm sad we couldn't hear that well in the back, so I don't know exactly what Emily said. So now I feel bad if I'm repeating anything. But the Honnold Foundation does an open call for grants every year, and so we get applications from all over the world. There are tons of people applying, and we're able to fund a small fraction of that. And so we have this tremendous pipeline of projects that are available, vetted, seemingly quite impactful, but we just haven't been able to fund them yet. And so I think what's next for the Honnold Foundation is hopefully just scaling, being able to fund more of these projects. So basically raise more money so we can give more money. I mean, I think, we've been sort of steadily giving more each year, and yet it's still just a drop in the bucket of what, the global need. I mean, there's something like, 800 million people on Earth without access to power. And then that's without access. And then you think people who are sort of living in energy poverty or scarcity. And basically, there's tremendous need, tremendous opportunity. You're sort of like, I suspect that I'll have things to do for the whole rest of my life in that regard.
And plenty more climbing to do.
There are a lot of rocks in the world too. Yeah. So I think I've chosen two pursuits that both
Very
have,
scalable.
very scalable, as they say. Yeah. I love scaling rocks. Yeah.
That's good.
That's really a joke.
Yeah. Taking us a little to the left, but following the humor train, again, kind of getting back into the grounding of this conversation. One of the things I always think about is, obviously there's like a lot of hard stuff that's happening right now, and it's easy to get lost in that. It's easy to get into it. And I actually think it's pretty important to sit in that and to be clear-eyed. And I also think, certainly from ultra running, this is something Theo and I think about all the time when we enter a race, is how can we bring joy in the dark, right? And, you watch a video of you climbing, and I'm sure some of this is edited. It's not always like this, but you seem pretty light. You seem loose. How do you think humor plays into doing hard things? You got an example of that where it's like cut through? Like, how does that feel to you?
Oh yeah, I think it's super important. I mean, having a good time while you're doing something challenging. I mean, basically just because something is challenging or physically uncomfortable or whatever else doesn't mean that it's bad. You know what I mean? Like, you don't have to suffer just because you're uncomfortable. And so, like, if you're going to be doing a thing, you might as well be having a good time. Like, I mean, I think that all the time with climbing. It's like, I climb for my own pleasure, basically. If it was, if I'm not having a good time, then why do it? And so, even when you're in serious situations, you can still be enjoying yourself. I mean, it's still a beautiful day. You're still in the mountains. Or maybe it's not a beautiful day. Maybe it's snowing and it's like nuking wind and it's kind of terrible, but you're still out there by choice doing a thing that you love to do. And so, you might as well be having a good time.
Yeah. No, I totally agree.
I mean, every once in a while you crack. I mean, obviously with ultra running as well, like 30, 40 hours in, you're like, you know what? I'm not having a good time. I hate this. But the key to being a good alpinist or a good ultra runner, any of that, is having a short memory. Just forgetting.
Forget immediately.
Yeah. Yeah. Because by the next day you're like, was it that bad? Like, how big were the mosquitoes? I don't remember. Like, I'm sure it's fine.
It was fine. It was good.
It was fine.
Yeah, it was great. Yeah, I feel like I had this moment in the Sahara where I was, was not built for heat as an individual, or if you can tell, not sort of my natural inclination, and was having, the sort of walls were closing in. It's like 125 out or something crazy. We were in the dunes, and I told Theo, I was like, I'm like, oh, we can't stop moving, or I'm like, I'm out. I'm like going down. And we ended up finding this piece of shade, and we're sitting there, and Peter, who's sitting in the front row helping out with some great thoughts, who's a professor from grad school, Scottish. So excuse my accent here, but he comes up, I'm in one of these worst moments. Like, I'm in that moment where he's totally dead, like totally in sort of the negative self-talk spiral. And he comes up and he's like, "You're looking fresh as fuck, mate." and it just totally broke everything, right? And like, you can totally pull you out of that really negative headspace.
Yeah. No, I mean, I think that's, in climbing, I think that's important part of having really good partners is to be climbing with somebody. Because I mean, generally I'm climbing with partners and climbing with friends, and to have a partner who can bring that levity to serious situations, and just remind you that even if it's hard, you can still laugh, you can still have a good time, you can still enjoy the process. I mean, of course, there's some moments where it's time to be serious and it's kind of like time for the A game. It's like, yeah, okay, that's when you really focus and do the thing. But most of the time, you can be laughing, you can be having fun.
You can be into it. Within that, obviously you've been on, a lot of solo adventures, but tons of, in groups, bigger adventures. When you're in the space where you sort of get that negative news, right? Like, here's the next bad thing. Here's the next bad thing. Here's the next bad thing.
So you don't read the news. Or you just sort of read it in very concise bunches every once in a while.
Is that like I do?
Yeah, I honestly do. I just kind of read like an email brief in the morning, and you're like, okay, I'm updated on what's happening, but I don't need to dwell on it. I don't know. I think it's kind of a healthy approach to distance yourself a little bit from, though presumably many of you guys work in things where you have to be more on the news. Like for rock climbing, you really don't need to know the news that well. Yeah. But I don't know. But even in fields where you need to know the news, like how much does it really affect your day to day? It's like either way you can compartmentalize it a little bit, where it's like you don't need to care about each little thing that happens. You're just kind of like, well, keep focusing on the thing that you do and do that well.
Yeah. I mean, I think that makes a ton of sense. When you're in the group space though, because I think this is something I observe in climate, right? Is people start kind of feeding off each other of here's a negative thing, and now we're gonna like really spiral that. Like, have you had that happen on, trips, and how do you engage?
A little bit. I mean, occasionally on expeditions, like the weather's been bad a long time, or you've been mired in the mud for a long time, and members of the team just start to be downers, where you're kind of like, oh, they just like can't get over it. Like it's, but I mean, really all you can do is show up the best that you can. You're like, okay, try to keep things moving positively, try to be psyched. And then, of course, a big part of that is choosing the team. I mean, ahead of time, you just want to make sure that you're going on an expedition with the right people, and nobody is prone to fits of depression. Like if you know that you're going to a rainy jungle for a month, you don't bring your buddy who's prone to fits of depression, because you're like, it's going to be grim. Like that he's going to spiral and it's all going to go sideways. So, I think a lot of it is that was a real example. Actually, I was thinking of a particular friend, but yeah, it's like you just have to plan a little bit ahead of time, and then once it's happening, just try to keep everybody fired up.
So when you think about, because I mean, there's something a lot of folks in this room are doing, we're constantly doing as we grow teams, as we do different things, we're always trying to pick who are the right people, who's not gonna spiral when things are gonna spiral. And obviously it's about, correctly matching, are we going into the jungle together on an expedition? Are we, doing the panel together? How do you think about picking folks who you want to spend time with, when you're going into expeditions, when you're going into climbs? How do you figure that out?
I don't know. That's interesting. It's an interesting question, because actually I suspect the answer for climate expedition is very different than business applications, because I think in normal groups, I think it's probably better to have a more diverse group with different opinions and all that kind of stuff. But I do think that for climate expedition in particular, it kind of matters that everybody shares a similar risk profile, or that people are comfortable doing roughly the same things. And I don't know if that's necessarily true for business,
It's actually, I think it's really important to have very different approaches to risk.
That's what I think. But I think if you're sharing a tent with somebody who's on a diametrically opposed position on risk, you're kind of like, well, why are we climbing together? You're kind of like, I want to climb, you don't want to climb. Like, maybe we shouldn't have gone on a climbing trip together. Whereas presumably in business, it gives a slightly more balanced approach, and you wind up getting closer to a correct answer, hopefully. But in climbing, it's just a little more like everybody needs to be aligned in order for, a climb to actually happen. So I think it's probably a very different approach, but I don't actually know anything about business, so who knows?
Well, I'll say for us, I mean, certainly Theo and I are always doing these big crazy runs, and our third co-founder, who's the smartest among us by far, Marissa,
doesn't do the runs because she's smarter, and that's why.
Yeah. She is super risk averse, and it's amazing, right? And I think that balance is actually so important for us in the business, to like balance those two things. Yeah. I got a couple more questions, sort of pulling in a few different directions here. One of the things that I think is true for a lot of people right now is it's a little bit of a fork in the road, right? For your business, for a career, kind of for us existentially as a movement is, hey, what are we going to do? How are we going to respond to this moment? Curious in your life, Alex, like what do you think about when you're in those fork in the road decisions? How do you try to make those decisions? How do you approach it? What's an example of one you've gone through?
Well, I don't know. I mean, what's an actual fork in the road? I mean, I would actually kind of challenge, like, are we at a fork in the road? I mean, I would say it's a challenging time for climate to some extent, but But, it's kind of been a challenging time for climate for the last 15 years. It's like I've been reading depressing environmental nonfiction for 20 years, and I'm kind of like, it hasn't gotten any less depressing. It's like, yeah, we're in a worse position than we were a decade ago, and we're in a worse position than we were 6 months ago, let's say. But, there's been a ton of progress made in other ways, and there, there are some things to celebrate. And I don't know, I don't know if I would consider it a fork in the road necessarily. And I think that's probably true for most of the big choices in climbing and sort of my own personal life as well, is that I think a lot of the things that seem like a really big moment are actually just kind of another step on a path. And you're kind of like, it's not necessarily a big junction or a big fork. I mean, the only real junctions in life I think have been like marrying my wife, or like having kids, or, a few key things that kind of shape the whole rest of your life. And like maybe dropping out of school, though even at the time it didn't feel like, I didn't think that it was a fork, because I didn't drop out of school. I just took a semester off. So I'm now like,
It's long semester.
it's 40 semesters in or whatever. I'm thinking about going back soon. But that's the thing, is I think it's a false choice a little bit to say like it's a fork in the road, because you're kind of like, oh, you're really just continually taking the next step and trying to do the next best thing that you can.
Right, in some ways, and by pressurizing it as a fork in the road.
Yeah, I think that's the thing, is I think it makes it harder to do the next thing if you put too much pressure on it. Like, this is a big moment, and you're kind of like, no, this is is it Tuesday? Yeah, it's a Tuesday. You're like, it's a Tuesday. It's fine. Tomorrow will be Wednesday. Like, let's just try to do the right thing now, do the right thing tomorrow, and and then when you look back on it in a couple of years, you'd be like, oh, it wasn't a fork. It was just part of the path.
I mean, there's something about saying the day of the week that just takes the temperature down.
Well, totally. It's like, I was like, is it a Tuesday? I think it is.
You really don't have a grasp on what day it is. It's fun.
Well, it's either a climbing day or rest day. The actual days of the week don't matter that much.
How many rest days do you have?
Well, I rested yesterday because I did crazy climate week stuff the whole day. Yeah, I don't know. I try to climb 4 or 5 days a week.
Okay, so you get some rest days in there.
Yeah.
When you think about, the sort of connection into...
Well, but then on the rest days, you do cardio. Like, you go running in the mountains and do other things. But
what's your cardio looking like right now?
well, it doesn't.
If you're going yours, I'm going, I want to follow.
Yeah. No, it doesn't. My cardio is very light. It's riding a city bike as fast as I can up and down the length of Manhattan is my cardio right now.
It's honestly, moving around
exciting.
Climate Week is an exercise.
That's very engaging.
Question for you. Obviously, this question is for you, not from you yet. I know that surprises everyone. When you think about like planting seeds, like the ideas that get stuck in your head that you're like, oh man, I'm going to have to go after that objective, right? Like it just gets in there. It's certainly my experience with big runs is, you'll have something, you'll see something, for the Sahara run we did, for instance, was a presentation in a class when we were in grad school. Peter had run this years and years ago. And I was like, that's something I could never even think about. Like, I could never go do that. But I got stuck in there. And then Theo and I were talking about it. And then all of a sudden, sauna suits showed up for us over Christmas. Theo had ordered sauna suits for these, they're like these trash bags.
That sounds terrible.
Yeah, it's horrible.
like, you guys should try climbing. It's way more bud. It's like, yeah.
Well, I think I enjoy it. I don't know.
Huh.
It's crazy.
That's weird.
But we wear these sauna suits and we're out running, and all of a sudden, we're doing the Sahara. What's a seed that gets planted for you? Like, what's a seed in your mind right now? What's the objective you're thinking about?
Well, I don't know, without going into specifics necessarily,
Yeah.
I do think that for me, it's a very similar thing where it's almost not like I plant the seed, but it's more like the seed sort of blows in and then gets lodged. Well, you know what I mean? Like what you're describing, where it's like you see something that's super inspiring and then it kind of gets lodged in some crevice and then it slowly starts to bloom. It's like a big weed coming up out of the sidewalk or something, where you're like, you didn't necessarily choose it as a goal, but for whatever reason it crosses your mind, and then you're sort of like, is that possible? Like, I don't know if that's possible. And then you start to think it through and you're like, it might be possible. Then you're like, no, but it seems too hard. And then, with enough back and forth, eventually you're sort of like, oh, I think I need to do that. And you're like, damn it. I mean, there definitely been a lot of goals like that, like various things over the years where I'm kind of like, I think when something is right on the edge, I think that's kind of when it's most inspiring. When you're sort of like, I don't think that's possible. And then you're like, no, I think it is. And then you're like, oh no, I think it is. And then you're kind of like, oh, and then you feel an obligation to do it because you've sort of reasoned it out and you've thought like, oh, actually, I think I could do this. And then, I mean, for me especially, I think sometimes there are goals where I feel like I might be uniquely suited to do them, where like, if this is going to happen, like I should be the person to do this. Like, I think I can do this and I don't think anybody else is going to want to, and I think it would be cool if somebody did and nobody's going to do it. So I should do that. I don't know if anyone else like circles around goals that way, but I think a bunch of the big climbs that I've done have kind of come about that way, where I'm kind of like, it's just such an elegant idea, like to cross all these peaks, or whatever, like big link ups and enchainments and things like that. And you're kind of like, I don't think anyone else is going to do that. So it's like, might as well.
It's cool. Yeah. I mean, I certainly experienced that moment where you're like, the seed's in there, you're thinking about it, and then you're like, I'm gonna have to do this. Oh no. Like it's
Yeah, totally. You're like, oh, I don't really want to. And then you're like, but I think I could. And then you're like, oh, I have to. You're like, terrible.
yeah. And then you end up doing it and it's
Yeah. And sometimes it's terrible. but, but that is kind of the joy, is to take something that seems impossible and sort of tinker with it long enough until, hopefully it actually comes together.
yeah. It's super, super iterative. When you think about the climate work, when you think about also your climbing work, how do you think about sort of pulling people forward? Obviously, Tommy and a number of folks were sort of there for you, in bringing you into that space. How do you think about that, sort of for the next generation? What are your thoughts? What's your approach to really pull people in?
You mean bringing people into climate?
Into climate, yeah.
I don't know. I mean, not to sound too like self-centered. In a way, I've never actually really tried to bring people in climate. I mean, I try to focus more on doing the right thing. I mean, I think, through the work with the Honnold Foundation, and obviously I've done some public-facing media sorts of things, like some climbing film projects that have the environmental components to them. Done a few films to National Geographic that involved science and the Arctic and sort of peripheral climate themes and things like that. And so, I like, if I'm going to be doing work, it's nice for it to be somewhat useful in that way. But in general, I'm just not a community organizer. Like I'm relatively introverted by nature. I'm sort of like, I'm not the person to draw people into a climate movement. In fact, I'm not sure. I mean, I'm not sure if I'm the person to do anything except rock climb. But I think that goes back to our little Venn diagram of, I'm kind of like, I'm not a great organizer. I'm not a great, speaker, like whatever else. I'm kind of like, but I can do a couple things all right, and I can hopefully still have some kind of impact by doing those things well.
So how do you think about it with climbing then? How do you think about it with pulling folks into that more and more?
Well, that's, again, I'm like, I don't really care if I bring people into climbing, though, I think the film Free Solo wound up bringing a lot of people to rock climbing who are like, I'm going to go check out rock climbing. Not necessarily free soloing, but they're kind of like, I'm going to go to the gym and see if that's fun. But no, I mean, I love climbing, and I love, for other people to get into climbing and to try it. But it's not like I want people to rock climb necessarily. Like, I'd love for people to have the opportunity. I love that there's so many great gyms now and that anybody can go try it if they're interested. But it's not like my personal mission to get people into rock climbing. I'm kind of like, if people are more into running, then, that's lame, but fine.
You kind of said a lot of negative stuff about running,
Running is running that far is really painful. That seems like too much. I'm just gonna say.
All right, if you ever want to come out, we're ready.
No chance.
No chance.
No, I do run. I mean, running is amazing, and running around the mountains is amazing. Just running that far seems very painful.
It is.
Yeah, exactly. So I'm like, I just don't need that.
It's great. All right, last couple minutes here, and then we're going to dive into Q&A. So get your questions ready. Something I think about a lot, and I'm curious if you have a thing, before those sort of big events, before you're going into something really big, for us, before we're going into an ultra run, a few different things that we always try to do to get into the right mindset, like how do you put yourself in that space? Like, what do you do? Are you superstitious? You got some stuff that you're doing? Obviously, you got to get nutrition, hydration, all of that right. But how do you think about approaching it?
Yeah, I'm not very superstitious, but I am very consistent in sort of habits and routines and things like that, particularly around big, hard climbs and things like that. So, I'd like to be getting up at roughly the same time, eating the same things, I'm wearing the same things, packing the same gear that I've practiced with, all that kind of stuff. So I think, and I think that kind of consistency isn't superstition. It's just that, I know what works. And so you just want to stick to what you've practiced. Basically, you want game day to be as close to practice as possible. So you just don't want to add more variables right before you do the thing that you've been practicing for so long. And so, I don't know, I mean, is that, yeah, I'm not into superstition stuff, like baseball style, like wearing the same underwear. Actually, I do wear the same underwear, but that's more out of practicality of living in a car. But, but it's not superstition for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I think, something I think about that a lot is really having, and I think this is something that we should celebrate a little bit more, is the power of those routines. Like, I think something that is certainly dangerous, I feel this in our work, is we're trying to do something really big. It's big, it's audacious, it's going to take a really long time. And again, falling back on those little things that you can be really connected to is so, so valuable.
What do you mean, like doing things that you're used to doing? Or what do you mean?
Well, I think we have a little bit of, in the climate space in particular, and I would be curious for your take, because my guess is it's analogous to climbing in that we sort of celebrate these like big macro wins, or like Climate Week oftentimes is a bunch of people made a net zero pledge, or here's a big piece of press. But the thing that actually matters, right, is like it's your consistency, it's the day-to-day routine. And in some ways, by over sort of venerating these big outcomes, you then miss the point, which is like the thing we actually need to venerate is the fact that we got up the next day and the next day and the next day and the next day.
Kept doing the thing.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I totally agree.
Yeah, I think it was a big part of it. All right, last question, and then we're gonna open it up to Q&A. When you think about resiliency in the climate movement, if you had to sort of put one thing that you want to like put out as a message there, what is the thing that you think the movement needs to hear? What do you think that, HF is really thinking about in terms of staying locked in? What's the synthesis?
Well, I think those are kind of different questions. I think HF is staying locked in on what we do just because I think we see such tangible results. It's like when we're funding these projects, you have a meaningful impact on some community's life, like right then, right now. It's like you have such an opportunity to do good in the world that it's hard not to stay locked in on that. You're sort of like, oh, we just keep doing the thing that we're doing because it has an impact and it matters and we're doing it well, so just keep doing it. So, I mean, that's one thing. In terms of climate movement, I mean, I just don't know that much about the climate movement. Like I said, I mean, I'm just trying to do my small part. But when you were talking about the climate movement, I'm like, I don't know, I just thought this up. So this could be totally half-baked. But I'm kind of like, the climate movement has been basically struggling for 20 plus years. It's like since like An Inconvenient Truth or who knows when, like basically no one's taking it seriously. Like it's basically a string of failures for 20 years. And so if anything, I think the climate movement has demonstrated incredible resilience because it's like after 20 years of nonstop failure, everyone's still showing up and trying their best. And I'm like, that's kind of proud. And
Yeah.
You're bound to win eventually. But I don't know. I mean, I think that the climate movement has already demonstrated tremendous resilience in a way. It's like there are already constant setbacks. But the thing is that, it's worth sort of fighting for every, percentile of a degree of warming or whatever. Like basically everything has a positive impact. And it's not like a binary, like either you win or you lose. It's like every effort you make can make the world a slightly better place in a small way. You're kind of like, well, it's better to take those steps than to not take those steps.
Yeah.
So,
I actually think, I mean, maybe it's half-baked, maybe fresh. I think that applies exactly to this moment that we're in, particularly in the sense, I mean, one of the things we always say in our team, when you're in an ultra race is like nothing is ever as good or as bad as it seems. And I think the truth on what you're touching on, right? We've been through so much of this before, right? Like,
yeah, I mean, there've been devastating setbacks for years and years and you're kind of like, yeah, the current political climate seems terrible, but I mean, there have been many other terrible times over the last 20 years or like last 40 years. I mean, I'm just not old enough to know the climate movement, since before my childhood. But I think it's been, basically it's always been an uphill battle to do the right thing, to help people and help communities and help the earth. And you're kind of like, that's always a challenge because it's always sort of contrary to the push of capitalism or whatever else. And so you're kind of like, it's still always worth taking those steps, like, engaging in the challenge.
yeah, I mean, a quote from somebody in the room, I believe, is, when you try to change the system pushes back. And I think it's been a long battle and it's so much further to go. And I think, again, this is one of my takes, but we've been 60 miles deep in a race and felt horrendous. And then you run another 20 miles and you feel completely different, right? And like, I think that's going to be the reality of our movement is
Feel even more horrendous.
no, not true. Sometimes it gets worse.
No, I know what you mean.
Yeah.
That sometimes you feel horrible and then an hour or two later you're like, you know what? I don't feel that bad.
And did you do anything other than just like keep
No,
doing exact thing?
Yeah, totally.
100%. All right. Well, we're going to transition into Q&A here. Before we do, so there should be pens out for everyone. Obviously, I'm sure everyone travels around with their own pen, but we left a little note card. So take a minute, jot down a question or a reflection, and then we've got folks running mics around and we'll dive into Q&A. So raise your hand. I'll call on you. Raise your hand if you've got a question. Great. Yeah, let's start there.
My name is Julia. I wanted to ask why you chose energy for your foundation. It seems like with your background in the mountains, it would have been like, oh, preserving nature or preserving mountains. Why did energy be the focus of your foundation?
Yeah, I mean, actually, so it kind of is preserving mountains to some extent. I mean, basically, I have always cared more about the environmental side, like protecting the earth. But I basically realized through various climate expeditions that uh, there's no point in protecting the earth if you're not helping human communities in the area, because basically nobody cares about nature unless their basic needs are met. And solar is so often the best way to meet people's basic needs and help the environment, basically. I mean, there are also some practical considerations in that, as a rock climber, you don't make that much money, but grants for solar go quite a long ways in terms of human impact, because solar is just, it's so cheap, basically. Like you can provide energy to a village for such a relatively low cost and have a totally transformative impact on people's lives without having to build a nuclear reactor or something. And so, so basically I've just always gravitated towards energy access issues. But also because I think I spent so much time off grid and traveled to so many places where you interact with communities that have been totally, that are off grid and will be off grid really for the rest of time, where you're like, literally nobody's ever going to electrify at these parts of the earth. So you're kind of like, solar is the solution.
Thanks. Yeah. I was wondering, as people that are, for both of you actually, as people that are deeply involved in, nature, and the natural environment's always been part of who you are, how do you balance conservationism with climate action? Say, for example, a large-scale renewables project, etc.
My take on that is that, and sort of what you were saying earlier, is that I think one of the key things that we need to do is we need to be unafraid to fail. And I also think we need to be really clear-eyed about the context that we're in. And so my push always when we're trying to make an environmental decision is to be really circumspect, right? To try to think about all of the different pieces, to think about people, to think about equity, to think about all of the different components. And then particularly when you think about conservation and trade-offs, what you're always trying to weigh, and I just think we need to admit that this is going to be imperfect and messy, is if you're choosing between, some species protection or, really building a massive solar project, there's some real trade-offs there. And I don't think that there is a right answer. And I don't think anybody saying there's objectively a right answer is there. But fundamentally, I think we have to be thinking really macroscopically. We've got to be thinking about the overall impacts and, doing things that are going to put us in a place that allow, again, those species to exist in as much of a way as possible. So I tend to be on the side of, let's act and let's do that in the best possible way that we can. But we also have to be really willing and aware that while the trade-offs feel really intense when you're in the specifics of a project, the trade-offs of the sort of whole picture are bigger in many ways. And so that's generally my take.
Yeah, I totally agree. No, I mean, honestly, I live in Las Vegas, which is the best climbing in the country for everyone that doesn't know, which is probably everybody. But it's freaking amazing climbing. But yeah, so you see solar farms in the desert all the time, and obviously there's a trade-off because there is life in the desert. But I mean, honestly, I'd rather see solar farms in the desert than to see, mountaintop removal in West Virginia or something, like coal mining, things like that, where it's like destroying watersheds and destroying whole ecosystems where there's abundant life, like actual plant life. And I'm like, I mean, I love the desert and I love, desert tortoises and the bushes and things, but you're kind of like, it's just not the same density of life as you see in so many other parts of the world. And so you're kind of like, yeah, it's trade-offs and it's hard to make trade-offs like that. But I think if you do it with a respect for life and really clear eyes, hopefully you can make good decisions and minimize harm.
Yeah, totally agree. Next question, another one. Yeah, great.
Making out like nothing's ever a big deal, but you give away a lot. How do you determine what's the right amount for you to give away personally? And do you have any message or kind of thoughts to share with philanthropists and foundations generally in terms of risk and speed of which capital is being deployed?
Yeah, thanks, Brady. Also, he's a real friend. It's really good to see a friend that came to Bridget's. I appreciate that. Yeah, no, so I've been giving roughly a third of my income since I started the foundation. And I started that when I was living in my van. And so, your needs are quite low when you live in a van by yourself. And so, my basic needs were comfortably met. And I was kind of like, oh, I'm making more than I need. I should just give away the rest. And so I started giving about a third of my income. And obviously my income has gone up quite a bit since then. And now I have a home and a wife and kids and all that. But it's like basically I still make more than I need. And so I'm still giving at least a third, which now just basically covers all the overhead for the foundation. So everything else we fundraise goes straight to grants. So that's kind of a nice like elegance to the foundation. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think in general, people could certainly give more. I don't know. And philanthropy, I think, is such a useful tool for climate. I mean, I think there are just so many projects that I mean, sort of like, I don't know, climate investment. It's like, basically, if a project is going to make money, somebody's going to make money off it, and there's still going to be so many people left behind by that. And so I think there's always going to be a role for philanthropy, and I think people could certainly give a lot more than they do, and certainly could invest faster and more into these types of solutions. I mean, particularly for climate issues where you're kind of like, it's time sensitive. It's better to do something now than to wait a few years and sort of accrue more interest and wait and see. You're sort of like, well, it's not going to be any better in 5 or 10 years. Like, better to act now, spend some of your money now, and try to do something positive.
Yeah, I mean, the only thing I would add there is I think one of the fundamental mandates for us as a movement, we think about this all the time as an organization, is to reduce the amount of time it takes to put resources in the right places. And that's just like one of the things that we need to be trying to do over and over and over. And that doesn't mean not diligencing things or understanding or really building out and understanding risk or the project's likelihood to be successful. But it does mean like really trying to avoid the BS that gets put in those processes. And I think
No, I mean, so the Honnold Foundation supports community-led solar projects around the world, and so it's like basically a local community chooses what they think is useful for them. Like, well, they're going to use solar for XYZ, like for agricultural pumps, like to pump water, let's say, or like for refrigeration, or just energy access, like for power. And so, like for lights, let's say, for school, whatever. But so the community chooses what they need, and really all they need is money. Like, they just need the capital to build the thing that will make their lives better. And you're sort of like, exactly what you're saying, the sooner you can get money into the right hands and let people do the thing they need to do, the better off their lives are. And honestly, the better off we all are sort of as a global society, because I mean, this is equity. This is like bringing people out of poverty. This is moving people off of fossil fuels. Like, this is just good all the way around. You're kind of like, it's like people know what they need. Just give them the opportunity to execute on it.
Hi, thank you. My name's Heather. My son is 16 and adores you. And I work in climate change. And so I'm wondering if in your many years of climbing, you've ever literally seen a change that you associate with climate change that affects climbing directly.
Dude,
So he's very focused on what's like literally in front of his eyes, the rocks. So I'd love any stories you can share that I can share with him and other people who really don't think it's relevant.
Oh no, there's so much. I mean, in climbing, when you travel to big mountains, you see glaciers receding, you see all kinds of things. I mean, even some simple things, like when I started climbing Yosemite in sort of 2005, let's say, the season was kind of September, October, and now the season is very much late October through November. It's just like way hotter than it used to be in some of these places, and you're kind of like, like the times in which you go climb in certain areas has just totally changed, and like weather patterns have changed. Like in Patagonia, it's notoriously the worst weather on earth. They're like way bigger weather windows now. Like, you get periods of good weather and it's just really different than it used to be. But I mean, most notably, if anyone's seen the film the Devil's Climb, is like a thing on Nat Geo, sort of Disney Plus, about my friend Tommy Caldwell and I bicycled to Alaska together and climbed this peak called the Devil's Thumb. But that climb, with that peak, the Devil's Thumb, doesn't get climbed very often, and some friends of ours had been there maybe 10 years before and had pictures and had a description of what they did to climb the wall. And when we got there, the pictures were completely different. Basically, the glaciers had receded so much that the way you access the climbing was totally different now. The rock was really bare and dry, which actually made it easier for climbing and faster for us to climb it. But it was just a completely transformed landscape. Like, everything about it was totally different. And that's an experience that you have, virtually every time you go to any of these big mountains now. I mean, you've probably heard about, glaciers on Kilimanjaro and things receding, but that's true, even Patagonia, like more basic mountains. I mean, the glaciers are completely different than they were even 10 or 15 years ago. And that's all stuff you can see in guidebooks. It's like, you go, you're climbing in the Alaska range, you're climbing in Patagonia, these places, like, you look at a climbing guidebook and you see the photo and you're trying to match the line of what you're trying to climb up to the photo, and you're like, where does it? Like, actually, I mean, on that same expedition, sorry, I have a lot of examples in this kind of thing, but yeah, okay, maybe that's good enough. But a friend, Tommy, and I basically got horrendously off route trying to climb this wall because there was a photo of where the route is supposed to start with like the tongue of the glacier, and so you're kind of matching where the glacier comes up to this rock wall, and you're like, okay, like, this is where we're supposed to be. Turns out the glacier just totally changed, and we just had a horrendous misadventure instead, because it turns out that wasn't the route at all. But yeah, there are tons of examples like that. And actually, that's one of the things that I find really frustrating around climate communication, things like that, is like, I mean, particularly in the US, where climate's so polarized and all that, and you have, half the country like basically believing that climate change isn't real and that the world's not really changing and whatever else. You're kind of like, you can literally go to all these places and see it with your own eyes, and it's just hard to deny any of that kind of stuff when you physically see it yourself.
Okay, so I'm a climate tech founder with some physical and medical disabilities. I'm not the only one, but there's not a lot of us. But one thing, this is my third climate resilience event of the week so far, and so much of the advice is just sort of push through the pain, stay on your feet 80 hours a day, get out of bed every morning, work until you bleed, work until you feel nauseous, never sleep, etc. I was wondering what advice you might have for people who, say, have a lot of resilience, a lot of pain tolerance, but maybe not, athlete level stamina or strength or something, in terms of how you can keep going when just maybe it's not so easy to keep going.
Well, for what it's worth, I actually wasn't pushing for that stuff. I was pushing for consistency, because I'm very anti ultra running and pain and all that. I mean, the thing is, so because the thing about being a good climber is that depending on what type of climbing you're trying to do, if you do 3 hours of concentrated effort a day, but consistently for long periods of time, you're going to be very good at it, eventually. And so it's not so much about pushing until deep pain. I mean, of course, like if you're doing huge climbing adventures, like cycling to Alaska or whatever, it's like, yeah, you'll have moments like that. But it's very much more about consistency, just doing the thing to the best that you can, all the time.
Well, and just to jump in there as well, I actually want to make super clear, I don't think that's the truth of ultra running or the movement here as well. I think one of the most important things that we think about all the time is like, how do you recover? How do you rest? How do you make space? And obviously, one of the things that, really defines whether you're successful in that or successful in something else is, can you really be both slow? Can you also understand the moments when you need to stop, when you need to rest and recover? And so I think there's this like the grind set movement, which I really hate. And I'm definitely not trying to underpin here, because I think,
yeah, but there's a difference in the grinding and suffering versus being consistent. Just like waking up each morning and doing the thing that you're trying to do and doing it well for a few hours and being like, okay, I have made progress towards my goals, and now I rest and I do the same thing the next day and I do it the next day. And, I think that type of consistency is how you get things done over a long period of time.
Hi, thank you. So kind of spinning off that question, I'm curious to hear, in those very kind of acutely painful moments, what are you doing in your head? Do you have a mantra? What do you think, like, how can you coach the rest of us, both of you, to navigate those hard moments? Because while this fight is one of endurance, there are moments where we hit a wall, we get fired, we are just about ready to give up. So yeah, that's my question.
yeah, I mean, I think about two things. One is I think about framing beforehand. So a good example is, this race we just did in Alaska, which 131 miles, it was tough. I had some really bad stomach issues. I was throwing up a lot at mile 100. It was really bad. And that was a moment where one of the things that I had really set beforehand is my goal was not to run 131 miles. My goal was to make sure that I moved as best as I could for 48 hours, right? And so that's something that I think is actually really important in this space. And we were sort of talking about this earlier, but I think that often we have this culture that is so results centric, in the sense of like, I'm going to do something, it's going to be visible, it's going to be public, it's going to be celebrated. And I think that's the wrong frame. Like, I think that's definitely the wrong frame for dealing with climate, is that like the way that we're going to get there is by, again, being consistent. And so my whole piece is like, can you beforehand shift that framing? And can you do that, again, when you're in a space that you're clear, like before you get fired, before that sort of really difficult thing happens? And I think doing that emotional work to sort of set your own expectations. How do you really value and view your life? If you can do that in a way that sets up and prepares for that resilience, I think that, at least for me, is how that applies, going from ultra and into life.
So just to throw you a bone here. So I have, this is kind of relevant. So I have actually run a few ultra marathons in my life, and yeah, but
There you go. You're talking.
but not ultra the way they're talking about. I've run 50Ks, which is an ultra, but that's like 30 miles as opposed to 100 miles. It's a totally different scale, because you can run, at least for somebody like me that climbs a bunch of big climbs all the time, running 30 miles off the couch like isn't crazy. It's very painful and sort of unpleasant, but it's not insane. But running 100 miles, I feel like that's too much. Or 130 miles is way too much. But no, what I was going to say though is that the few ultras that I run, my goals ahead of time are always to not get injured and comport myself with dignity. Like basically like smile and have a good time the whole time. Like largely because not to be silly, but like at an event like that, like people know me and they're like trying to take a photo and trying to do whatever. And I just don't want to be in the pain cave, just suffering and be like yelling at people. I'm like, you know what? I should be having a good time, smiling, like having a nice time with folks when they pass me or I pass them or whatever. And so I think going into an event that you know is going to be difficult, but having realistic goals like that, where you're like, okay, I don't want to get hurt and I want to be able to smile and have a good time. And those are my goals for this event. Because, you know, I'm not a real runner. I'm not trying to win. There's no real goal around it besides just having an experience and trying to comport myself with dignity. And so that's exactly what you're saying. It's like, I think I set those goals ahead of time and a time when I feel comfortable and safe and it's all good. And then when I go and do the event, no matter how uncomfortable it all starts to feel, I'm like, okay, well, I have clear expectations myself. I just need to manage these.
In the way that I would see that, again, obviously, you know, in life, you know, you're not choosing to be there. And I think that's one of the fundamental differences that is really important is like, we're choosing to be in that space. It's not a thing that just happens to us. But I think certainly for me, I think about this all the time, and maybe this is a slight difference here, but I think a lot of battles for running is to learn how to deal with those things. And so again, I think that, you know, the way in which we sort of can take and apply those lessons, we all have those things. And I think one of the fundamental things is, okay, when you do go through a hard thing, when you have figured it out, are you actually really accumulating that in yourself? And do you have the process and the practice to take that learning and get to the next? Because I'm sure you do this in climbing all the time, but you're always learning, you're always thinking about how you get 1% better. I think that we generally as people aren't great at doing that when we think about our own self-narrative or our own self-talk. Those are things that you can be just as aware on and put in the same type of attention and focus. And then that can help when those moments come and are just thrown at you.
I think I had a kind of a reaction to the comment about like relentless, just going and going and going in the burnout, because we kind of talk about sustainability and resilience in the architecture engineering space, and they have to be in balance. So one of them, you're protecting the environment, and one of them, you're protecting a building or infrastructure system, whatever it is. They have to work in balance. And kind of have how Theo set it up for the breathing exercise is like bringing yourself back and working smarter. Like you can work hard, but you want to work smart too. And I also think there's a very big issue with communication is the jargon, the emotions. It's very charged. Climate industry is very charged. So I guess I kind of asked the question of, you know, how are these conversations like, there's a lot of interest in the climbing space of climate. What are the conversations in the communities that when you go and you see these communities and they're trying to be part of this narrative, like how does that look? I'm just really curious about that situation where you're traveling all the time and you get to see this firsthand and you get to see how much the communities are interested or frustrated. What is that like?
And I actually here's your answer. I'm not sure if I understand the question. Yeah, but that's just me. Which
so
you answer and then I'll understand.
Well, and I would like to clarify, is that in the sense of like, what is Alex's experience with the communities that you're in and working with?
Yeah, exactly. The communities of the foundation and like how you're seeing how these solutions are changing them and how they're having a conversation around climate.
So you're saying like grantee partners with the Honnold Foundation, like communities in which we're working or they're working, how they respond to the work?
Yeah, because it's such confusing conversation a lot of the times. Like it's
Actually, I don't think it's a confusing conversation. I mean, the thing about supporting community organizations is that they're the ones coming up with the ideas. They're the ones choosing the thing that's best going to help their lives. I mean, it's like we're literally just sending money to people to execute their good ideas that they thought out for themselves because that's the best thing that will serve their community. So no, I mean, nobody knows better what's happening on the ground than people in you know, these rural communities. I'm sort of like, no, I actually totally disagree with that in that I think that they know more than anybody like what's going on because they're freaking living it. You know, they're the ones who are being uprooted by changing climate. You know, they're the ones suffering from droughts and you know, crop failures and things like that. And so yeah, I mean, they understand much more than I do because I freaking live in climate controlled, like drive a car. It's all like pretty comfortable lifestyle. Yeah, I'm in this like freezing room, sort of like, no, I mean, I think the communities that we work with understand far better than we do. And that's why we're supporting them because like they know what they need.
And my thought on that, and maybe this is where you're going, is that I think this is your point, which you're making is, again, like when we get into the sort of the macroscopic, thinking about the world, thinking about all these things, there's all this tension, is, lack of clarity. But like for us, when we work with a community who's just hit by a hurricane and there's tons of wasted material, that conversation is actually pretty simple. It's like, we have trees across the road and we need those to not be there anymore. And we would love if we could reuse that material. And if you can help with that, that's amazing. And so again, I think there's this balance between the uncertainty as well as, real clarity oftentimes when you get to the community level.
I have a question from more of a climber perspective. I'm curious to hear your thoughts about, as climbing has become more popular as a sport and more people are going into backcountry areas, how that's been changing sort of the relationship between people and the land in those spaces. Additionally, a lot of really important popular climbing areas in the US are in red states, in very rural communities that don't have necessarily all of the resources to kind of put into the environment locally that places like New York City do to protect our watersheds here. So I'm curious, as a climber and in the climbing community and the climbing movement, how you think about sort of fostering that environmental sustainability piece, which I think historically has been a strong part of the community, but as it's become bigger, it's a bigger tent, there's more and more folks who are less concerned with it. I'm just curious to hear you think about that. Also, especially as we think about bringing climate into those conversations in local communities, say like West Virginia near the New River Gorge, where I spend a lot of time. Additionally, as a climber myself, I feel like I would be really remiss to not ask if you have any very quick recommendations for A2 or A4 pulley injury rehab. Thank you very much.
Okay, well, so for the rehab, definitely just climb through it. Like, honestly, like be gentle and like try not to hurt it, but definitely climb through it. I've climbed through so many pulley injuries. Yeah, this is actually find me later. I'll talk to you about it for real. But a very prestigious climbing coach was once like, "Oh, a pulley injury," and he like almost laughed at me. He was like, "Oh, that's a normal thing. You just climb." And I was like, "Oh, that's exactly what I needed to hear." So I just kept climbing. They get better. It just takes a while. But no, in terms of advocacy and climbing sustainability. So in general, I'm really supportive of the growth of climbing. I think climbing has been incredible for my life. If other people want to climb outside, that's great. And I think in general for the broader environmental movement, the more people having powerful experiences outdoors, the better. I mean, basically because nobody cares about nature unless they actually go out and do something that matters to them outdoors. And so I think it's probably on the whole better for more people to go outside and have adventures in the mountains and climbing outside and all those kinds of things, just because at least that way they vote for the environment. They care. They actually get involved in local issues like that. And so that said, I mean, obviously I support climbing access organizations. Like I've supported the Access Fund quite a lot over the years, and there are various ways to make sure that climbers' impacts aren't disproportionate, and that we can leave no trace, all those kinds of things. But that said, I think it's better to have more people going outside than fewer. It's like, so if whatever avenue people take to have an adventure, like that's probably a good thing.
My thought, obviously, no thoughts on the climbing injury and working through that. My take on the powering through and sort of building this, in a broad tent and thinking about how we as a climate movement can bring in more red states, more of sort of the side that is less brought into this right now, is I think we just need to be really narrative forward there. Like we talk about our company all the time as we're reshoring American manufacturing and we're investing in community jobs. Like that is a thing that people love, that is dead center. And I kind of think there's this thing right now that's happening where like climate is this word that people are like, oh, you can't say climate. You can't say climate in a grant. You can't say climate here. It's going to get cut off. I think we need to be like Medusa, right? Like you cut off a snake's head and then like 5 other come up, right? We just keep renaming, and we keep really pushing that narrative forward, because the faster we do that, the more we can bring people in, the better off we'll be.
I was really intrigued by the fork in the road, but then also what amazing careers you've had and now still have ahead of you. You're both scaling from here. So was there a time when you just went, I'm in it, like this is the thing I'm gonna do for my life? Like was there a time when you thought that? And if that was too deep, then the other one was like, do you know there was sport or pastime you could do together that you'd agree on?
Whoa, that's interesting.
We could go for a casual run together.
Hell yeah.
That'd be fun.
Let's do it.
No, I think that's an interesting question about was if there's ever a time where you're like, this is the thing I'm going to do. because actually I really never did experience that as a climber. That's really been in hindsight. It's kind of like after being a professional climber for 15 years or whatever, I was like, you know what? I guess I'm a professional climber. But uh, but the thing is, I mean, yeah, you laugh. I actually didn't mean that as a joke, really. But it's because when I first got sponsored by climbing companies, the industry wasn't that big. Climbing wasn't that big mainstream. Nobody knew about it. It was all kind of niche. I was like, oh, I'm getting free climbing shoes. I'm living in a car and I'm climbing full time. Like, does that make you a professional climber? I'm like, I guess, But then after many years and actually being able to support myself and now supporting my family and everything, I'm like, oh, I guess I'm a professional climber, and I've just kind of embraced that. But it was never a choice like this is what I'm going to do from here on out. It's just kind of like. And this is why I keep talking about consistency and things like that. But day by day, I always wake up and I'm like, I'd rather go climbing today than do anything else, except for the occasional days where I have to rest because I'm just too tired. You're kind of like, I think that's what makes me a climber. I'm kind of like, oh, I choose to go climb every day, and so I guess that's what I do. But really, it's in retrospect that you see that where you're like, oh, I've actually devoted my entire life to this thing, but I certainly didn't choose to ahead of time.
I mean, my take on this one is I think we might climb a little bit tomorrow. So,
Oh yeah,
yeah,
oh cool.
yeah, with you. So,
Oh, there we go.
we'll get a little bit in. I think that for me, again, it's one of those things where I certainly think a danger listening to, like, I don't know what the future holds. I don't think any of us do. And I think it's always really easy to connect dots retrospectively, right? You're able to see like, oh, this connected here, this connected here, and this connected here. And I think that leads us to overemphasize and think that we have a cause and effect relationship between a lot of those things. And we do. We obviously have agency, we have power. But a lot of the times those things happen and you're like, wow, don't understand how that happens. And for me, like, I grew up in the woods. I grew up, my mom was a hydrologist in New Mexico and, was always fighting these water issues and sort of was raised in this really activist space. And knew and understood climate work was like something I wanted to do forever. And then the fact now in my life that like I can spend every day working on trees and wood with people that I love in the climate space, it's like crazy. And to a moment being in it, I mean, how about right now? I'm certainly feeling like in it in an amazing way of getting to talk about the backcountry in a climate context. Like, it's pretty sweet. So feeling really, really good there. All right, we're going to call it at that. First, thank you all so much. Just wanted to say personally, thank you so much, Alex. Thanks for the conversation. Thanks for being here. Thanks for the work of the Honnold Foundation. A couple other folks just to thank. Thank you to Room and Board. So the chairs we're sitting on, again, salvaged red oak, super, super cool. Mostly that species is getting wasted in massive ways. We're hoping to reuse it. So really thank you to our partners at Room and Board. Thank you to our partners at Athletic Brewing, who have provided a lot of stuff for mingling after. Amazing NA beer company. And yeah, one last plug. We've got an event on Thursday. It's a sauna event in a sauna. We'll be talking about design and a bunch of different components there. So if you're interested, we're trying to do events a little differently at Climate Week. Check us out on Instagram. You can follow us there. And then obviously connect with everybody here. We've got smooth food and snacks. Thank you all so much. Catch up.
Thank you guys. Pleasure.